I'm still not sure what happened to my girlfriend and me 3 days ago, and honestly, the more I try to explain it, the less rational it sounds. My name is Robin, and last week, I nearly didn't make it out of the woods. My girlfriend Priya and I have been hiking since before we were even dating. The Appalachians, the Rockies, the Cascades. We've slept in tents on the side of mountains in freezing rain and thought nothing of it. So when we planned a 4-day backpacking trip through the mountains of upstate New York, it felt like a regular weekend to us. And look, if you're not from New York State, you probably picture skyscrapers and yellow cabs. But drive 3 hours north, and you're in a completely different world. Dense pine forests, granite ridgelines, crystal lakes. It's the kind of place that makes you feel like a small, humbled thing. We love it up there. The first day was perfect. A little rain in the afternoon, but nothing we couldn't handle. We found a good flat spot, made camp, ate dinner, and turned in early. We were tired in that good, honest way that only comes from hiking 8 miles with a full pack. That's when it started. Sometime around 2 a.m., I felt Priya shift beside me. I opened my eyes and she was sitting upright, completely still, staring at the wall of the tent. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't answer right away, just held up one finger, wait. Then she whispered, "Someone is walking around us." I thought she was half asleep and dreaming. I reached for the tent zipper and she grabbed my wrist so hard I felt her nails dig in. "Don't," she said. "Please don't open it." I froze because here's the thing, Priya doesn't scare easy. She's the kind of person who laughs at horror movies and walks to her car alone at midnight without a second thought. Seeing her that frightened made something go cold in my chest. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching around the perimeter of our tent. Not an animal. The rhythm was wrong for that, too even. Too intentional. A person. Definitely a person. Walking in slow circles around us. Then came the laugh. High-pitched, soft, almost playful. Like a child who just spotted something funny. Except we were alone in the wilderness at 2 in the morning. And nothing about this was funny. We didn't move. We barely breathed. After what felt like 40 minutes but was probably 10, the footsteps faded. The laughter stopped. The forest went quiet, and I don't mean peaceful quiet. I mean held breath quiet, like even the trees were waiting for something. At dawn, I unzipped the tent. We were alone. But our campsite looked like a ritual had been performed while we slept. Rocks, dozens of them, arranged in careful stacks and deliberate patterns all around us. I know for a fact they weren't there when we set up. I would have noticed. I convinced Priya to keep going. I'm not proud of that. The second day, she barely spoke. She kept glancing over her shoulder, slowing down, scanning the tree line. I looked every time she did. I never saw anything. But I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I had the feeling of something just out of sight, just past the edge of where your eyes can focus in a dark forest. We cut the day short. Set up camp early. Priya asked me to go home in the morning, and I agreed. We ate in silence, and she fell asleep the moment she laid down. Exhaustion will do that to you. Even terror can't fight off the body's need to shut down. I was still awake when the whisper came. Right at my ear. Right at the fabric of the tent, like someone had pressed their mouth against the material. "Come outside, Robin." I stopped breathing. A different voice, slightly higher, answered from the other side of the tent. "Yeah, Robin, we're waiting for you." They knew my name. I didn't move. I didn't wake Priya. I just lay there, completely rigid, listening to them. They started moving again, but this time it wasn't walking. They were running. Running around the tent in wild, looping circles, laughing that same horrible laugh. Except now there were two of them, and the sound was layered, overlapping, getting louder and more unhinged with every pass. Then one of the voices changed, dropped deep and wrong, like a sound that shouldn't come from a human throat, and it screamed, "Come outside now." Priya woke up screaming. The women outside, if that's what they were, began throwing themselves against the tent. The fabric buckled inward, the poles bent. I swear they were trying to drag us, tent and all, somewhere into those woods. And through all of it, the laughing never stopped. Then, like a switch being flipped, silence. Footsteps sprinting away into the dark. Priya and I sat holding each other for 30 minutes without speaking. I had nothing to say. I don't think words existed for what we'd just experienced. When I finally worked up the nerve, I unzipped the tent just a crack. Standing 20 feet away, perfectly still in the moonlight, was a young woman in a white dress. She was staring directly at me, smiling like she'd been expecting me to look, like she'd been waiting patiently the entire time. She lifted one hand and waved, slowly, casually, the way you'd wave to a neighbor across the street. I zipped the tent closed. Neither of us slept again that night. At first light, she was gone, but the campsite looked like the night before, worse, actually. Rocks everywhere in stacked formations, and this time there were sticks bound together with twine, shaped into symbols I didn't recognize. Priya didn't recognize them either. I photographed them before we left. I still haven't figured out what they mean, and part of me isn't sure I want to. We packed up in 10 minutes and ran. Not jogged, ran. We covered 2 days of trail in one. Got back to the car, drove home in almost complete silence, and I sat down to write this before I could convince myself that any part of it had a rational explanation. I know what you're thinking. Someone was messing with us, some strange people in the woods playing a prank, getting their kicks from terrorizing campers, maybe. I've been telling myself that. It's the only version of this story that lets me sleep. But here's what I keep coming back to. The part I can't logic my way around. The part that's been sitting in my stomach like a stone since we got home. How did they know my name? We were miles from anyone. No one knew our route. I never said my name out loud, and yet those voices, those wrong voices, called me by name like they'd always known it. I don't have an answer for that. I've thought about it until my head hurts, and I still don't have one. We're home now. We're safe. At least, that's what I keep telling myself. But sometimes late at night, when the apartment is quiet and I'm almost asleep, I think I can still hear them laughing. Day I realized that the most dangerous person I'd ever encountered wasn't some stranger in a dark alley back in the city. He was a short, skipping man named Marcus, who everyone in town swore was completely harmless. 3 years ago, I left behind the only life I'd ever known. I grew up in a city that never stopped screaming. Sirens at 2 a.m., neighbors through paper-thin walls, cars honking at nothing. The moment I had enough money saved, I didn't look back. I found a small town tucked between mountains and dense forest that felt like it had been forgotten by the rest of the world. And I mean that in the best possible way. The town has maybe 400 people. There's a diner, 2 bars, a gas station that doubles as the only mechanic, and 1 grocery store. The nearest city is over an hour away. If you want quiet, if you want to hear nothing but wind and birds and your own thoughts, this place is paradise. I took a part-time job stocking shelves at the grocery store just to have a reason to leave the house. My real income comes from remote work, which gives me something most people only dream about: time. Time to hike, time to fish, time to disappear into those ancient forests for an entire day and come back a little more human. It didn't take long to fall into a rhythm. I'd work early mornings, then spend my free days exploring trails that weren't on any map. The locals were warm and genuinely friendly, the kind of small-town kindness that feels almost suspicious if you're used to city life. Everyone had a wave and a story. Everyone except one man. His name was Marcus. The first time I encountered him, I was barely out of my car at 5 in the morning when he came sprinting toward my window out of nowhere. Every instinct I had from city life fired at once. I jumped back and yelled. He screamed right back at me, inches from my face, and then he skipped away. Just turned around and skipped down the empty street like a child who'd just gotten exactly what he wanted. I stood there in the dark parking lot, heart slamming against my ribs, completely stunned. A coworker appeared at my shoulder and said, calm as anything, that's just Marcus, he's harmless. Apparently, he'd been drifting around town for years. Nobody knew where he slept. Most people assumed he lived under one of the bridges near the creek. He wasn't violent, wasn't a threat, just present, always present. The town had simply absorbed him the way small communities sometimes absorb their oddities without question. Over the following weeks, I saw Marcus constantly. It didn't matter what time it was. Crack of dawn, on the way to work. There he was, skipping along the shoulder of the road. Late night after last call, Marcus wandering the empty town square. He was short and built like a man who'd spent decades doing heavy labor. Couldn't have been more than 5'2". He wore the same stained white tank top every single day, with royal blue pants that might have been jeans or might have been sweatpants. I could never tell. His beard was long and gray and untamed, his hair pulled into a ponytail at the back, even though the top of his head was completely bald. But the thing everyone remembered about Marcus, the thing that made him almost endearing in a strange way, was the skipping. He never walked. Not once. Everywhere he went, he skipped. There was something about it that was almost innocent, childlike, like whatever was happening in his head existed in a completely different world than the rest of us. One morning, driving to work, I spotted him at an intersection. He had his back to me, waving enthusiastically at something across the street. I slowed down, curious. When I drove through the intersection and could finally see what he was waving at, there was nothing there, nobody, just an empty sidewalk. He was talking now too, animated and gesturing, having a full conversation with empty air. I drove on and didn't think much of it. Talking to yourself isn't exactly a crime. That weekend, I decided to push deeper into the forest than I'd gone before. No trail, no path, Just raw wilderness. I'd been hiking for almost 3 hours when I heard it. Voices. Not one voice. Multiple voices echoing through the trees from somewhere ahead of me. Out here, miles from the nearest road, that sound hits you like cold water. Every hair on the back of your neck stands up. My first instinct was to back away slowly, but one of the voices, one of them, sounded distressed, like someone was in trouble. I pulled out my pocket knife and moved toward the sound. The voices were coming from just beyond a thick cluster of trees. I crept close, pressed myself against the bark, and carefully looked through the gap between the branches. It was Marcus. Alone. He was sitting cross-legged on the ground, rocking slightly. But what stopped my blood cold wasn't what he was doing, it was the sound coming out of him. He was performing a conversation. Two voices, maybe three, each completely distinct. One was low and cruel, calling him a coward, a failure, something worse that I won't repeat. The other was sobbing, a genuine broken weeping that didn't sound like performance at all. It sounded like grief that had nowhere left to go. Back and forth, one voice attacking and the other begging for forgiveness. Each one sounded like a different person entirely. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Then the cruel voice went quiet for a moment, and then it said, clearly, without hesitation, "He's behind the tree. You can't let him get away this time." Marcus turned his head and looked directly at me through the branches, and in his eyes, for the first time since I'd known him, there was nothing innocent, nothing childlike. What I saw there was something ancient and cold and absolutely certain. He charged, not skipping, running. Full sprint, screaming something about how I wasn't going to make it out of the forest. I turned and ran with everything I had. My lungs burned within the first minute. I could hear him behind me, sometimes close enough that I thought I could feel the air shift, and then farther and then close again. He would laugh and then scream, laugh and then scream. I have never in my life run the way I ran that day. Eventually, the sounds behind me stopped. I didn't slow down until I burst out of the tree line. I crouched behind my car and scanned the woods for a full minute before I moved. Marcus was gone. I drove straight to the police station, hands shaking the entire way. The sheriff heard me out in silence. She was skeptical at first. Marcus had never shown aggression before, not once in all the years he'd been wandering the town. But when I described the location in the woods, her expression changed. The color left her face completely. She told me that several years ago they had found human remains in that part of the forest. A local man, someone the whole community had known. The case had never been solved, no arrests, no real answers. And now that I was describing it, she said, her voice quieter now, almost to herself, she was starting to remember that Marcus had first appeared in town right around that same time. We went back into the woods together. She knew the area well. But when we reached the spot, Marcus was gone. Not just gone from the clearing, gone from the woods entirely. She got emotional standing there. I could tell this case had never really left her. Nobody ever saw Marcus again after that day. He simply disappeared, the way he'd appeared, without explanation. No trace, no answers. I still hike those same woods every week, sometimes more. I carry my knife every single time, and I find myself scanning the trees when the wind shifts or a branch snaps somewhere out of sight. I don't know if Marcus killed that man. I don't know if those voices he carried inside him were guilt, or madness, or something else entirely. I don't know what he saw when he looked at empty street corners and waved. But I know what I saw in his eyes when he turned toward me in those woods. And sometimes, late at night when the forest is completely still, I hear something that sounds almost like footsteps, light, rhythmic, and too fast to be walking. I never look. Since we graduated high school, my friends Michael and Ray and I would disappear into the woods for a weekend. We still do it, even now that we're all married with responsibilities, mortgages, and kids who ask too many questions. It's our thing. A promise we made when we were 17 and somehow never broke. When we were teenagers, we were obsessed with caves. We'd heard that the woods on the edge of town had a few, small ones, nothing dangerous, and we made it our mission to find every single one. Over the years, I think we only ever found 3 or 4, but the searching was the point. As adults, the trips became less about exploring and more about staying connected. We'd hike, we'd camp, we'd talk about everything we didn't have time to talk about the rest of the year. We weren't reckless. In all those years, the worst thing that ever happened to us was Marcus stepping on a wasp nest when he was 19. That's it. We knew the woods. We were comfortable out there, which is maybe why what happened didn't immediately terrify us at first. The discovery, the cabin, it was mid-afternoon on the second day of one of our trips when we found it. A cabin sitting alone in the middle of nowhere, no road leading to it, no trail, no cleared path, just trees, and then suddenly this structure. We joked that we were in a horror movie. Michael actually said the words, "This is where the music would kick in." We laughed. We were idiots. We circled the building before approaching. It wasn't really a cabin, more like a large wooden shed built from rough planks that had gone gray with age. One room, no windows that weren't cracked or missing entirely. We peered inside before we stepped in. Broken furniture, a layer of filth on every surface. It was clearly abandoned, had been for a long time. Ray suggested we go in. Michael and I didn't argue. We'd found strange things in the woods before. An entire clearing that turned out to be the old camp of a traveling circus, complete with rusted equipment and crumbling shelters. A weird shed wasn't going to scare us off. It was a curiosity. We loved curiosities. The sound the air inside wrong, dry, almost stale, like air that hadn't moved in years. There wasn't much to look at, just the rotten furniture, the dirty floor, the four walls. Michael started poking through the debris in the corner. Ray and I just stood there, taking in the silence. Then we heard it. A dragging sound, slow, rhythmic, and completely out of place. It wasn't above us, it wasn't outside, it was coming from beneath our feet. We looked at each other. The cabin had no visible basement, no staircase, no door, no opening of any kind, just solid wooden floorboards. And yet, the sound was unmistakable. Something was moving under us. I got down on my hands and knees and pressed my ear to the floor. Closer now, it was unmistakably real. A slow, wet dragging, like something heavy being pulled across stone. I started moving the broken furniture, kicking debris aside. In the far left corner, half buried under years of grime, was a rusted iron handle set into the floorboards. A trapdoor. Descent, I know. I know what you're thinking, but I opened it. The smell hit me before anything else. A wave of cold, foul air that made my eyes water. Thick and wrong, like meat left somewhere dark and forgotten. I wrapped a bandana around my face, which helped about 10%. I aimed my flashlight down into the dark. There was a ladder. Below it, a stone floor. I could hear the sound more clearly now, echoing up from below. That same rhythmic dragging. I told Michael and Ray I was going down. Ray grabbed my arm. I went anyway. The cold was the first thing I noticed on the ladder. Not the cold of shade or a cool evening. The cold of somewhere that sunlight had never reached. It seeped through my jacket like the temperature itself was wrong, like the air down there was from somewhere else entirely. I reached the bottom and swung my flashlight around. Stone walls. Stone floor, 2 heavy wooden support beams, one on each side of the room. Nothing else, no furniture, no supplies, no reason for any of this to exist. Michael called down from above, "What do you see?" And before I could answer, a figure stepped out from behind one of the beams. The man, he looked ordinary. That was the first thing that struck me, how completely disturbingly normal he looked. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, clean-shaven, green t-shirt, jeans. He could have been someone I passed on the street. But he was limping, dragging his right foot across the stone floor in that slow, lurching rhythm, the exact sound we'd been hearing. And he was breathing heavily, labored, wet breaths that didn't match his age or appearance. I yelled. I couldn't help it. The sound that came out wasn't even a proper scream. More of a strangled yelp, the sound of someone whose voice momentarily stopped working. The man didn't react at all. He kept limping, moving from one side of the room to the other, like I wasn't there, like he was on a track, completing a loop he'd been completing for God knows how long. I called out to him, asked if he was okay. His lips were moving, I could see that now, but what he was saying wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. Just a low, continuous murmur that blended with the sound of his foot on the stone. I took a few steps closer. That's when he stopped. He went completely still. The mumbling stopped. The heavy breathing stopped. And then, very slowly, he turned his head to look at me. Just his head. The rest of his body hadn't moved. His eyes found mine, and I felt something I cannot describe. Not fear, exactly. Something deeper, something cellular, like my body understood something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. He turned the rest of his body to face me, and then he just stood there. Not breathing, not blinking, just looking. The retreat, suspense closing, I backed up toward the ladder slowly. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to move carefully, not to run, not to show it I was afraid. I don't know why I thought that. I don't know how I knew. When my hand closed around the lowest rung of the ladder, the man took one step toward me, one step, and stopped. I went up that ladder faster than I have ever moved in my life. I didn't say anything to Marcus and Ray. I just grabbed them both and said we needed to go, now. We ran without looking back, except I looked back once. Right before we cleared the cabin door, he was standing at the base of the ladder, not climbing it, not calling after us, just standing there in the dim light from the open trapdoor, one hand resting on the rung, looking up at the three of us with those hollow, empty eyes. We reported it to the local authorities that same night. They investigated the cabin. They found no one, no evidence of anyone living there. No prints, no belongings, no sign of occupation, recent or otherwise. They checked missing persons reports. No matches. They couldn't even explain why the cabin existed in the first place, that far out with no road access, nothing. Like it had never happened. We still do our annual trip. We're more careful now about where we walk, more deliberate about which paths we follow. And I can tell you with complete certainty that if we ever come across another structure in those woods, a shed, a shack, anything man-made, I will not stop to look. I will not joke about horror movies. I will not go inside. Because here's the thing that keeps me up at night, even now, years later. The authorities said nobody was down there. No signs of anyone ever being down there. But they also said they could hear something when they first arrived at the cabin, a slow, sly dragging sound coming from under the floor.